Good evening. You're listening live to the Two Extreme Horror Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you live from the Pinehurst Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. Gentlemen, we just had a shooting in one of our major malls. We've had a lot of noise going on today here in Central Florida. We'll talk more about that in connection to the film that we are going to be discussing tonight, the ABC Sunday movie from 1973, The Night Strangler, a follow-up to 1972's The Night Stalker, starring, of course, Kolchak, the character that we've come to know and love a little bit from talking about the first movie. I, of course, ladies and gentlemen, have RDV and Eazy-E Eric Brina in here with us tonight talking about this phenomenal sequel. Gentlemen, good evening. It's good to see you again.
Good evening.
Yeah, how are we?
Good.
Nice.
And you?
Nice. RDV is a little saucy, I can tell already.
I'm feeling a little bit peckish, that's all.
Lighten up, bro. Decaf.
My 21 years is approaching.
You know, if you were a Night Strangler, you'd have a lot more years to consider things, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is we're going to compare and contrast the original movie versus the sequel. And as we all know, as Joe, good evening, Joe, comes in and some others, when we talked recently about the 1972 Night Stalker movie from the ABC's Sunday Night Movie of the Week, I believe it was, in the early 70s, of course. One of the things that for me struck out from my initial impression was the fact that, wow, what a really, really good movie written by Richard Matheson. Dan Curtis was involved, and he was involved in a lot of really good things, specifically The Dark Shadows from the 70s and some others. So overall, supremely high quality TV movie back then. And it was so popular. Obviously, we're leading up to the TV show that debuted in 1974. But before that, we had to do one more movie. And this time they're in Seattle with Kolchak and some shenanigans that happened there. So to me, guys, I want to sit there and say is that even though Curtis wasn't involved too much of this one and Matheson didn't necessarily write it, this is a really, really strong sequel to me. I enjoyed it a lot, and I honestly go back and forth on whether or not I think I like this one better than the first one, even though I probably would argue the first one might be slightly better, but it's that strong, it's that fun to debate. So I can't wait to do a little bit more of a deep dive on what's going on. So let's go around the horn here a little bit. We had talked, Eric, if you want to go here first, about just how huge this TV movie was and how popular it was back in the 70s. But let's talk a little bit about the sequel. What do you remember about that for your initial impressions?
I remember, I did watch it when it, originally aired. I know it got, about 80% of the ratings that the Night Stalker did, which made it a tremendous success. And what I remember liking about it also is it had a lot of the feel of the first movie, only as far as the Kolchak Vincenzo dynamic and the structure of the way they unfolded the plot with the killer and what he was doing and how he slowly put the pieces together and how where he got help this time from, Mr. Barry and his, how he interacted with the police in a different city, which was slightly different the second time around. What I noticed, I said, the thing about the Night Stalker was, set in Las Vegas. So it was, bright lights, big city sunshine, and then the darkness of night. Whereas the Night Strangler, it was, it just kind of had a different feel because the sun is never out in Seattle. So it just kind of felt, kind of like the day was just like a less dark night. And it just gave the film, to me, I think atmosphere, this movie had a better overall atmosphere even than the Night Stalker.
I would agree with that, especially not just for the actual location where they shot in Seattle, where you see the Space Needle. You get to see a Western place that's not LA or San Diego or something like San Francisco that might have been on film or TV. You get a little bit more of a unique setting that wasn't necessarily popular at that time in Seattle. And by all accounts, several people that I know personally that have spent time in Seattle all say the same thing about just how gorgeous it is, but how there's just that overcast thing. And Seattle wouldn't really, I think, become more mainstream until the 90s with movies like Fear and other things too. RDV, I believe this is a first watch for you that you watched recently, correct?
Yes, and I gotta say that I love the one-liners, the jokes in here. He's like, you should talk to my professor. What's your name? Crabwell. Jeez.
It's snappier, isn't it? This film, it's a little sharper, I think.
It is, and man, Louise Harper, Joanne Flug.
Flug, I think.
Luke.
It's Flug.
Like I said, I love the. He had what's her name was supposed to be Joyce Gabriel. No, she's a complete airhead, and then she had her husband, play Wilma.
Her husband, Wilma Crankheimer.
Like I said, I love the little side kickers that are in this movie. Mr. Barry,
It's a sexier movie too. Don't you agree?
Oh wow! It's like, and I said I love the fact that he's like, he's every time he somebody says something, he kind of gives a kind of lip back, it's like he's like and when his friend Vincent, whoever tells him to get out of his office, he's like, "Go check him out." He's like, "Coming, mom, coming with her."
Yeah, that dynamic is certainly interesting too. But one of the things that you mentioned that I think really stands out a lot, and I want to just state what it is. I don't want to judge necessarily how obvious it was maybe at the time, because I didn't see it then live. So I don't know if Eric, you might have some feedback on this, but the fact that you had, I believe, a married lesbian couple on primetime television, even though it was a primetime TV movie in the early 70s, was really out there. And of course, certain things in the 70s started becoming a bit more mainstream as far as being presented in the public eye. But to me, that was supremely progressive at the time. And, the fact that you saw all these go-go dancers early on, I mean, in scantily clad outfits, really is a testament to, how society was portrayed in the media, in the late 60s or going into the 70s too. And I think that actually added a lot to it, because let's be honest, Joanne Flug, she's a stunner in here, a natural beauty. She graduated Winter Park High School, which is just a few miles down the road. Rollins College is right there. It's a private school. It's where all the old winter money used to come down here. Her father was a mayor here in town, not in Orlando, but Winter Park's right here. So I knew her name. And when I looked her up, I went, that's why I know her, because I'd heard about her when I was a child.
You know what she also did? She's also the voice of the Invisible Girl in the 1967 animated version of Fantastic Four.
Yeah, she's got some chops to it, but kind of like the first movie, she was not just eye candy. Even though she's an attractive woman in here, she's has a relationship with Kolchak, and we get to see what happens. But to me, comparing it to the first one, again, the Seattle thing, I think the atmosphere is fantastic. There's a lot going on in here too. This is definitely not for the weak of heart, or if somebody just wants, something to sit back and unplug their brain and watch. There's a lot going on with the bad guy in here. So let's just jump right into it. And to me, when we start talking about Vincenzo, his boss, Tony, if you want to call him that whole dynamic, it's there, but I don't know how much of it I like, because I almost feel like they almost overdo it. But I don't know. Eric, you mentioned that. Why don't you talk about that?
I never really thought about it like that. I mean, I enjoyed the banter between the two. You might have a point about him overplaying it. I did like, at the beginning when he goes, hey, look around the corner and see if there's somebody left, left over from a roadside production of the front page. I thought that was a good one-liner, but again. How many times does Kolchak have to give Vincenzo the truth right in front of his face before he'll believe it? Now, the second time, fool me twice or whatever, but they did the same thing for 20 weeks in the series as well.
Right.
But I thought the two actors worked so well together. I think that, they probably played it up for that reason. And getting back to something you said before, I never really thought, that Charisma and Wilma were married. I just think she was kind of like her handler, because she was clearly not capable of taking care of herself.
Yeah, I mean, that's a detail that I don't want to piss.
She was very, very butch.
If it was, that line isn't nearly as funny as it was in the movie. So
I was more surprised by the fact I'm going, wait a minute, this is early 70s and this is on a TV movie of the week. Okay. I'm trying to go, wait a minute, when's the next time that you see that? Well, you see stuff like that later on, of course. So that just jumped out to me, and again, I think it's a sexier setting too, not just the ladies, but like you said, the atmosphere. But RDV, you'd mentioned something before with the last episode, and I kind of wanted to ask you about it in here. I know when you'd watch the first one, there was an element of a cheese factor that you mentioned too that seemed a little bit unbelievable for you. And so I wanted to see with this one if you felt like that was still there, or did it seem like it was more serious or worse? What do you think?
The villain was, I'd say, I thought it was much more interesting than the vampire they had in the first one. This one, where they have like an underground, city, which, most people, they have tours for it too. I don't know if this is true about Seattle. I think it was just made up for the movie.
No,
it's true. It's a real deal.
Is it true?
Yes.
I didn't know that until about a year ago.
Then that makes it even more interesting, because I like stories like this, and it's just more like a Jekyll Hyde kind of like a thing where he needs a formula. I kind of like that more into that, where the vampire thing was like they made it too hokey. It's like I don't know, but like I said, this one had more serious. This one had more lore. This had more, and this also involved doing research in the old libraries. I would love to go in a library and look at the old stuff like that and just, piece stuff together. You don't see that in anything or reading comics today. They're like, people are piecing back, going back, look at the stuff.
Are you trying to say that you think this particular movie is a little bit more of not a whodunit, but more of a detective, and the other one was more action? Because that's the way I would describe it.
Yeah, exactly. This one's more detective, and this is basically what I would have had. You could have replaced Kolchak with Batman. Having him do the detective stuff.
Well, there were two, balls out fight scenes between Skorzeny and the police. And there was only one in the Night Strangler, but I attribute that to the police force funding being cut in half.
You're fired.
I mean, I don't know how that works because I didn't see any riots at all.
Look, one interesting theme that I wasn't going to get too deep into, but talking about how it's got some progressive type themes for modern TV at the time. Okay, we're in Seattle. We're on the West Coast, the left coast. California was still, for the most part, somewhat conservative at the time. I know it's hard to believe, but of course, Seattle and Pacific Northwest was not. And I've known people that have been there for the most part their entire lives. So we talk about these things, how things have changed, how they've stayed the same. And one of the things I think that you brought up that is kind of interesting is that, okay, the type of people that are getting murdered in here, or the type of people, the go-go dancers, are not the kind of people that your police force is going to pay attention to. Nobody cares. And so it's kind of weird because the whole satanic panic thing in the 70s and 80s with cannibalism and the FBI and profiling people really didn't become a thing until the late 70s and early 80s. So the whole serial killer thing and somebody doing that, the whole how you go about trying to figure that stuff out was still kind of in its infancy in a way. And that's one of the things that I definitely like about here that you said, RDB, is that this is more of a whodunit detective thing, because you're right. There's an elaborate thing here. These go-go dancers are getting murdered. They're losing some blood. So, of course, we know Kolchak and Tony are going to be kind of like, well, we should be on the same page, but we know what happened before, but we got to watch how we do it this time. I think that adds a level of seriousness to it. I do agree it's there. But also, in addition to the fact that nobody really cares about the type of people that are being there, there's that whole layer of political influence, just like the first one, which doesn't go away, which adds a layer of cynicism to it, which I think is good. But also, let's just be honest, we're here really watching how the whole thing unfolds. And I popped a lot trying to figure out what the hell was going on, because Kolchak would not have figured out what was going on if he just wasn't doing his due diligence and the boring, crappy stuff about detective work, which the police refuse to do, because he's got a guy that's doing in-house research that nobody paid attention to, and he strikes up, I don't want to say a friendship, but they were friendly, but more relationship, where the guy's recognized for what he does, so he decides to do some more work, and they come up with this really convoluted plot where every 20, 21 years, there's being these sets of murders and all that. Kolchak latches onto it, goes to everybody with proof. They still don't believe him. The guy comes back with even more proof, and you're like, holy crap, they tie this into Mark Twain and photos and stuff. I popped hard when I said, wow, they're really making this more detail than they needed to be. So I agree with you, RDV. This was a much better plot to me. Than
I gotta say, one quote stood out to me. So he says, "Get this straight, Mr. Kolchak. No carnivore or hoopla tactics on this paper. This isn't Funtown, USA. This is Seattle. Yeah, Seattle. There's no fun there at all." How much was he correct?
Now, I will say there was a slight difference in that Captain Schubert actually took it more seriously than the Vegas police. Because remember when Kolchak was laying it out, and then he started correcting him on the facts when he goes,
Yep.
in 1889, there was this, and this. And he goes, he goes, you looked that up? And he goes, well, we try to do a little police work around here. You know, and he knew what was going on. I think he was less, head in the sand than, say, Payne and Butcher were in the Night Stalker. And but again, how do you believe that stuff if you're world is, if you're in the real world and someone brings that to you, even though you did some research yourself, how can you bring yourself to believe that? I mean, like I said, if something like that happened in the real world, would we believe that? I mean, that's, yeah.
What was really cool is when even later on when we were doing the research, Barry uncovered further clues, an old interview with Mark Twain, leading to a Dr. Richard Malcolm, a surgeon in the Indian Army Civil War. That was one of the original staff at Seattle Westside's Mercy Hospital.
But
I love that they actually throw like actual history in there. I mean, now I would actually want to see this guy, I'd love to see more stuff, like the journalists and the investigators, people actually go back to the Old West like that, and actually show people like the murder and stuff, be kind of cool. Actually, like I said, there'd be a great Batman comic going through the years, chasing after him.
I think the best side character of either movie was John Carradine as Crossbinder. When Wally Cox comes in, with all, he goes, "Who is this man?" And he goes, "Well, don't you know him? He works for you." And he goes, 35 years. He just goes, "Good God."
And Mr. Carradine is obviously, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, he is the father of David Carradine and the Carradine clan that has been around in film. So, of course, we're talking about the young man that in the 70s, man would be in Kung Fu. This is his father in here, and he has a very striking voice delivery, which is what you're referencing.
He's tall.
Yes, yes, the Carradine clan. They're small town Hollywood. Well, one of the other things, too, about this show that I think kind of popped out is that you mentioned the lore, RDV, and, the cynicism about dealing with, horrific type things in modern times, I think's the hard thing to believe here, because I definitely agree with you on that, Eric. But one of the things I liked about this film, too, that I thought was done very well movie-wise is, while he might be, he's got a younger woman that somehow ends up with him as they're investigating stuff that doesn't seem overly contrived. It's not a meet cute or any of that nonsense. It works for all intents and purposes, especially in an alternative time like Seattle. But they show Seattle while they're going to different things. You see them to Space Needle. You see them walk around different things. That they're at one of the universities. I don't know if it's UW or some local college or whatever, but you get to see a lot of parts that are pretty famous. And so it's not like a movie where you go, oh, yeah, that's the really expensive hotel that I'll never see. It's places that you go to publicly to it. And that's why before, when we talked about the underground city of Seattle that exists, that the main city has been built on, that's a nice little subculture because you get that historic feeling, not just of seeing it with the city, but also of hearing about the way the researchers looking stuff up and they're diving deep into it, but also how it plays out with what's going on. And the fact that this is Kolchak in 72 having to deal with the press and how everything's kind of controlled and manipulated, and that cynicism that we talked about in the first one that's still in here, I think that does make it very, very good. And like the first one, the fact that they only had a little bit of the bad guy in there, I think even less so in this one, makes it better because really the story's not about that. It's about him as a character, his chemistry with his boss, dealing with, I don't want to say corrupt, but government officials and how horrible that is and everything.
Censorship.
It's for like a better word, it's great. And also too, he's competent at what he does, and it takes work to do it. And only by doing that does he have a chance to kind of figure out what goes on. So it's kind of an adult tale wrapped up in some of the goofy stuff that we like, with vampires, and of course with the TV show, other things later on. But yeah, I just think this movie is really, really solid, and it's got a lot of bright spots to it. And I was shocked by just how, like I say, in some aspects, I almost like it better than the first one, even though I think the first one might be slightly better. It's really a tough call for me. But overall, fantastic, must watch, just like the first one. So what do you guys have to say about that?
I was just saying the elevator scene where they go up to the space station. He's talking about how vampires, and he's like, so what do you think? He's like, well, I think these people in the elevator, because they're not going to be safe.
That's an elevator ride no one's going to forget.
Yeah.
I thought, I said this movie wouldn't be as effective if it were made today, because I thought my favorite part, like the scenes with Wally Cox, with the big giant scrapbooks of which were eventually replaced with microfilm, and then with everything being on computers. It would have taken a lot of what made this movie, gave it its charm away. So yes, it was your right place for this, right time period for that kind of movie. I did like that, in the extended version, which they did because they were toying with a theatrical release, gave them more time to look around Seattle and to find out that Oscar Goldman killed Grandpa Munster. But
the $6 million man's boss, ladies and gentlemen.
And I agree. I said, saving him basically till the end of the movie, and he got to monologue a little bit, which kind of filled in the missing pieces of what they had been able to put together. And I said, but just right place, right time. Everything about this movie just worked for me.
What really threw me off is the fact that when Kolchak walks into the living room or dining room and sees like the two dead corpses there, it's like, is that supposed to be like his children?
Or someone that is just bodies that he put there to affect that.
Because the guy has a screw loose, because he started talking. He's like, "Oh, darling," and I'm like, and then at first he had no idea who Kolchak was and stuff, and Kolchak's like, "Well, you're the one that's been murdering people." It's like, and he sounded like he was confused, like he didn't really know what's going on, like dementia was setting in, maybe because he's starting to old age.
Well, he did. He said, you tried to kill me the other night. He goes, "Oh yes." I mean, I said, he had bigger things on his mind. He had to get those, get his work done, take that elixir, so he'd have 21 more years.
Yeah.
So he probably didn't think twice about Kolchak when he was busy beating up the police force, because that was where he saw him.
I liked it when the cop took it. Chief, he's like took his camera. He's like, "Hey, that's private property. Get it back."
Well, it definitely displays some of the distrust of government that really, I think, look, everything kind of goes back to 1963, right? When I think American culture in general just said, you know what, we're going to question everything about United States government, no matter what your political affiliations are and all that. And that's not what the stream is about. But there's definitely, like I say, a certain element to that in here, not just of him being censored, but that's really, to me, the elephant in the room of, how do you tell somebody in the 70s when you're working on for a major newspaper, oh yeah, we've got a vampire. What do you mean, a vampire that sucks blood? No, it's a killer that takes blood from people. But well, then how do you explain? You're in a no-win situation. And so the fact that he's just the Kolchak is just trying to drive forward and figure out what's going on, and it's like he almost has to for his sanity. That's what he cares about. I kind of like it, because in a way, it's like, in a way, you almost see how smart the administration is here that's trying to hold him back. Because to your point, Eric, you mentioned before how his boss was like, well, what do you mean we didn't do our research? Of course we looked it up, and somebody like Kolchak, who's really driven, can be easily manipulated, because he can get so lost that he can't see the forest of the trees. He's looking from the bottom up, and this top-down approach that any city official or anybody that's any position of power, whether it's the government or whether it's a media member, is going to look at it from like, well, wait a minute, how does this affect us? Not necessarily good or bad, but how can we profit from it is in there. And I don't know if they play that a lot in the TV show, which we've not talked about, but I still think that that's, one of the harder things to get across here and here. But that you're definitely right. They keep that in here. It's really one of the toughest things that I think to answer. So to me, a part of me wants to see Kolchak even get more bitter and more going, you bastards really know what the hell you're doing. And yeah, in here, I think there's a little bit of I do have to watch what I have to say. I do kind of not want to have to write these stupid, dumbed down assignments or whatever like that, but I have to watch myself because it's the paying gig that I need to have. So they didn't really explore it that much, but it was there. And I just wonder if he's going to get more cynical.
Well, there was, something that happened towards the end of the second movie that, I think both movies had been building to when he's talking to Vincenzo, he goes, well, Crossbinder has, pull with, the police, right? He goes, you've got to get him to talk to Captain Schubert and tell him that they've got to do what I want. And Vincenzo goes, do you hear yourself? He goes, do you hear what you just said? Of course I did. I just said it. And then he goes, it's like, holy crap. That's how, almost crazy he has become by, basically, dealing with two otherworldly things and getting basically no help from anybody who could. And he basically just turns it, makes it about him. I thought that was a neat little touch that,
Did you ever know there was a planned third TV film sequel?
It ended up being the third episode of the series.
Yeah, with the UFO, nuclear power plant, and androids.
Just in Chicago instead of Hawaii.
I was a big Fugitive fan growing up, and Quinn Martin Productions had a show that was for a season or two called The Invaders, which is a very cynical kind of show, and it was basically about this guy that knows there's UFOs, and I like that. It's kind of like The Fugitive, where it's like an everyman type episode where nobody believes him and he has to constantly be searching for the truth. And I think that format lends itself to some fantastic television, like we've mentioned with Kolchak here in the movies, but also like The Incredible Hulk and other episode of the week type things. It's a perfect format for it. I think it touches the inner child in all of us that likes a little bit of detective work and fiction, and I think that's why sometimes you can get the right blend of something like this, where it's not all Scooby-Doo dumb shit. It's adult stuff. How do you deal with things, but dress it up even and all that. I think it appeals to the child in us and the adult too. And that's one of the things about this show that I was really curious about, going, well, now that's 50 years old, would it still be relevant today? And I would say yes. And I don't know, Doctor, I think you were telling me about how, I guess a few years back, they tried redoing it and it really bombed horribly. And I don't even remember that. And it was simply called Kolchak. What do you remember about that?
I never said anything about that.
No,
okay, I thought we had talked about it.
It might have been me. They tried in 2007. I think Stuart Townsend played him, but he was playing. But it was Night Stalker in name only. The only nod really to the series was they CGI Dare McGavin walking through the newsroom. Of course, he'd been dead for 3 years. It went by the time the show came on, but
right.
But it just none of the feel. None of
2005. Yeah.
Was it that? Okay, that was all.
Yeah. 10 episodes unaired, or 4 of them were unaired. It was so bad by the 6th episode. The 6 through 10 were not even aired at all. But Gabriel Union, Eric. Wow, look.
It just goes to show trying to reboot something without thinking about what makes it successful is very difficult to do, and that's lost on a lot of the younger people that are making the decisions on rebooting old material. And over on the Xtreme Movie Show, where we've talked about that theme coming up, saying Stranger Things and other things too, a lot of times people who didn't live there don't get what made it popular. So
they did. They changed the storyline. The storyline was an investigative reporter Kolchak, after his wife's killer. He's trying, because his wife is killed. He's trying to find her. So he teams up with this woman named Perry Reed, Jane McManus, and their boss Tony Vincenzo to investigate strange crimes in Los Angeles that may contain dark supernatural elements. So they tried to make it into like supernatural, but with like less like supernatural, I guess, or less quality writing. And I think at this point too, like I said, I never even heard of this even in 2005. This was on my radar.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of the series and I've heard of the actual 2 movies, but I've never watched before. But this reboot, ABC, I think by this time a lot of people have given up watching anything on ABC.
Oh, you didn't miss anything.
Like I
it
said,
was a
probably came out.
misfire.
It probably came out during the middle of summer. That's fine.
Well, let's think about what we've seen so far out of these 2 things as we wind things up here, and that's this: you've got a guy that's in a seersucker suit. He's got the hat on. He's got a look, so it's instantly recognizable. Yes, it's a late '60s, early '70s type look, but it's still there, and it's not really stupid or goofy or flashy. It just is. He does something. How well he does it, I don't know. He's been fired from a lot. He's got a temperamental personality. He sticks out. Sometimes he can be grating. So he comes across as being an everyman kind of guy. And he's trying to do something that we all want to do, which is figure something out. And he puts the effort into doing something. No matter how you dress it up, I think we're attracted to the fact that Kolchak is a character. So the other stuff is just window dressing that allows us the opportunity to explore him. So if we actually review the show and talk about it, that'll be interesting to see if that stays consistent based off these 2 wonderfully fun movies to watch. I mean, and cutting edge on so many regards. I mean, without these films, you don't have X-Files. You do not have a lot of science fiction craze, I think, going on in the 70s and 80s based off Out of the Moon Race from the 60s and all that. I just think that you don't in terms of media, because there's something dorky about monsters and stuff like that that's considered childlike, especially, people growing up in the 50s and 60s. So to have these shows be that popular, these movies and this show, really led the way for like an X-Files, for Supernatural, for any of those kinds of things that we've kind of taken for granted now that the graphic capabilities have caught up to what we'd like to see on screen. But when you forget about storytelling, when you forget about characters, when you forget about having a cool setup, and in this case, letting Seattle be the star of the show too, showing backgrounds of it, you miss out on that. And that's what I think is missing in some of the direction, some of the TV shows that we see today, especially on the Netflix Vaporware and Prime and other things. Some things do a good job of it, but it's rare now, I think, to find something like that. And so that's one of the struggles we have here at the Xtreme Movie Shows, filtering through all this content to find something we think is worth watching. So on that note, guys, I'd like to go around and get your final thoughts from me. I will simply reiterate, guys, if you haven't seen these 2, they're available for free on YouTube. Check them out. I believe there's a Blu-ray copy floating around somewhere that you can get a hold of if that's your thing. They're definitely worth a watch. We're strongly considering eventually doing season 1 and reviewing those episodes to see how that goes. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, must watch, really progressive at the time. And one thing you said, Eric, and I'll go with you first, completely rewatchable. I don't feel like, oh, it's just a 70s piece that sucks now. You can watch it right now today and still be entertained.
Yeah, again, like I said last week, only this time watched it for the first time in '73, watched it for the last time last night. Holds up wonderfully. I wish that the TV show had carried any of the trappings of the 2 movies into the series. And I found out, but none of the creative forces behind the movies had anything to do with the series. And they put it up against Angie Dickinson's Policewoman, which is another reason why it only lasted 1 year. But the movies, like I said, Night Strangler, wonderful. And I think my favorite one is whichever one I've watched the most recent.
But you like them both good. Yeah, they are. RDV, these were new watches for you, I believe. So just overall, how would you sum up the 2 films?
Well, the first one was kind of a dud to me. The second one actually was really good. I'll actually start looking into the series because what I like about when you actually have a series, I know there's only 20 episodes, but if those 15 minutes of each of those 20 episodes are as good as this movie was, I'll enjoy it.
Nice. I think that's a good point you bring up there, RDV, because there's an argument to be made that television in the 70s is really probably the strongest it's ever been. And I know a lot of people are very loyal to certain shows over the past 15, 20 years. While that intensity, I think, is incredible, I can't stress enough to people that haven't seen these films or say a lot younger than we are, just how big these were when they came out, how many people watched them and talked about them, and how cutting edge they were. So entertainment, yes, but quality-wise, I think good too.
Well,
so
the thing about the 70s is that anything like The Fugitive or anything like that made more sense because you know what? They have freaking cameras everywhere, smartphones. So you really listen. Nowadays, they try to do it. Like I said, I just watched Condor. It was okay. So I kind of liked it, but like I still love the movie with Robert Redford so much better because you know what? You could hide back then. You could have more spies in our country. Now you can't do anything without freaking somebody watching you or listening to your computer, your camera, or even possibly your radio. There's so much technology you can't hide. So when if a guy trying to go on a run from the CIA, good luck with that.
You do have a good point. Somebody said that the advancement of technology has taken a great plot point away from TV and movies. The search for the phone, or the cutting of a phone line, all the things that the phone was central to in older movies and TV. That's just gone now because everybody's got a phone on them.
Right?
Yeah, we had here in Pine Hills a small little place. I think it was one of the Baby Bells before they broke up in the late 70s. And it was the central hub that had the, what do you call it? The ladies that would connect all the wires, and they were the cable wires. And I know people that used to manufacture the old routing switches and stuff too. And it's a big deal, and how quickly things change can really make an effect on it. But ultimately, I think it comes back to the fact that we're interested in the character and kind of the setup to see what he goes through. So the technology thing, it doesn't have to be a crutch, but you just have to be smart about how you're doing it.
The other thing I thought was funny was when they said there's an underground city, I'm like, maybe had thoughts in the 70s beneath the Planet of the Apes. Which was when I looked up, actually was a year before this. A couple years before this. So I was like, did they steal a plot point? And they're like, oh, I guess there actually is stuff, like. And it's interesting about that because I want to look at more stuff because in the past year I've been looking like abandoned subways, so tunnels they have in New York, that are like no one's gone down there. If there's a guy I follow on YouTube, he would sneak in. He would go, lift the manhole cover, go down, crawl there, and he's hit all these stuff that's been hidden from public now because it's unsafe. So instead of fixing it, they just block it off for the past 20 years. So unless you actually knew it. It's down there. You're not going to know it's down there. It's like there's a lot of history that's been buried.
Well, that leads to the conspiracy theory, distrust of the government with stuff in the Grand Canyon, all sorts of stuff around the world. You're absolutely right. And it's definitely a counterculture thing. And I'm glad that they put that in for the
Cincinnati
movie.
has another subway thing that's blocked off now. They don't use anymore because they banned because remember they back then used to use steam trains. So now they're using so the ones they're using now are subway cars. The subway cars can't fit around those corners, because the tunnels were too small.
Yeah, I didn't know that existed until you sent me that link.
It's exact. So it's
great here.
Isn't it funny? So I'm like, how many more? So when I think of the X-Men back then, when they said that the Morlocks, people living underground. Now I'm thinking it probably is possible.
Absolutely. Well, it just goes to show too how, for example, you mentioned that you hadn't heard about the Seattle Underground here in the Night Strangler, but the upcoming PC game, Vampire the Masquerade,
I think takes place there. I heard of the Seattle Underground. I've heard of the Seattle Underground when it comes to music, but I never knew the underground there was a city.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting thing as we'll close with this. Tonight's topic on the Xtreme Movie Show with Eglinton from My Left Comics and myself and whoever else is going to be a part of it. Tonight's Top 10 Tuesday, we are going to be discussing plotless movies. That's E's pick, and so we're going to come up with something. We're going to see how that goes. So thank you, Eric, for showing up tonight. I know you're a huge fan of it. It's because of that we wanted to cover that tonight, so I appreciate your feedback. I know you are the master when it comes to Kolchak and RDV. Of course, thank you for being you, sir. Group hug, ladies and gentlemen. All right, guys, thanks for showing up. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for sharing the links out and everything, too. We've had a lot of feedback on Kolchak. I hope that continues. Definitely, it's a new audience. I've already seen some tweets about it. I'm always curious to see who likes what we do and all that too. It always brings in a new group of eyes, and that's what we're all about as we're growing here. So thank you for listening. Have a good night and stay extreme.
Good night, kids.
And as always, if you're listening to this, it may be censored.